Good evening. Thank you so much for coming out on a snowy night. Isn't this a beautiful image this time of year to think about street markets and produce? My name is Laura Heisler. I'm the Director of Programming for the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, otherwise known as WARF, and we are one of 3 organizations who work and live in this building and are delighted to bring you the Crossroads of Ideas series. The other 2 organizations, of course, are the Mortgage Institute for Research and the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery. And the 3 of us have come together to create the Crossroads series. This is just our 2nd lecture in the series, which started this fall. Can you raise your hand if you got an email about this and you are here having gotten an email confirmation? Great, thanks. If you didn't get an email and you would like to be on the email list, please do take a moment at the end of the evening to put your name on that list, and then we'll be sure to email you about the Crossroads series. Sometime after the first of the year, you'll get an email from us telling you about other things that we have here and asking you which of our programs you might like to know about going forward. So thank you again for coming. I'm going to take just a few minutes to give you a little bit of background on this series and a few sort of housekeeping tips for how we're going to run the evening today and what you can expect going forward. As I mentioned, this series is a joint production of the 3 entities that work in this building, and it's our vision, it always has been our vision, that this building and the town center that you're in particular would function as sort of a crossroads, in fact, a crossroads of ideas that connects different parts of the campus to one another and to the community. And this series is very much in that spirit, and it seeks to connect ideas and research going on topics that are relevant to our lives, very much the Wisconsin idea in action, and we'll be presenting these each first Tuesday of the month when UW-Madison is in session. So we will not have one of these in January because it'll be spring break. The next one will be in February, and it will be Cecilia Klingele, who was to have presented last month, and if you got an email about that, you know that she was unexpectedly had a medical issue, so unable to present last month. She'll be coming back and doing the talk in February, and we're very much looking forward to hearing from Cecilia. I'm going to take just a moment to introduce tonight's speaker, and then we'll turn things over to him. I just want to note we are taping each of these sessions, so if you would like to watch it or send it to someone who might have been interested but couldn't make it tonight, please look for that later this week on the Discovery homepage, which is discovery.wisc.edu. And also, if you ask a question during the Q&A session, which will come at the end of Professor Morales' remarks, please do wait for a microphone to reach you so that we can capture that, since we are recording everything. Other people probably have your same question. They want to hear what it was so they understand the response. So with that, I'm delighted to introduce this evening's speaker, Alfonso Morales. Professor Morales is Associate Professor of Urban and Regional Planning and of Civil Society and Community Studies here at UW-Madison. He's originally from rural New Mexico and has roots in family farming both there and in West Texas. He is a researcher, an advocate, and a practitioner consultant on food systems and public markets, and has been invited to speak on these topics nationally and internationally. His scholarship includes 4 books and more than 50 articles and book chapters, and his broader intellectual agenda connects reason, thought, and behavior to various kinds of interaction, to social organization, and back again. He is thus interested in various manifestations of thought and organization. For instance, he has written about the problem of social order among street vendors, about how Spanish language radio stations make irrational programming decisions, about how women seek care for cancer, and other topics. Currently, he is most occupied with food systems, particularly food distribution modalities and urban food production and the many economic and non-economic benefits of these practices. His publications are found in Spanish and English and have appeared in top journals of 7 different disciplinary associations. Organizations no less well known than the USDA, the Health Resources and Services Administration, the Ford Foundation, and many others have supported his research and advocacy. And his work has won a number of awards, and his professional service extends beyond the classroom to community organizations, some of whom are here tonight, and on behalf of marginalized communities. So please help me in welcoming Professor Alfonso Morales.
Thank you very much, Laura. I want to acknowledge right off the bat Laura Heisler and the kind invitation of the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery. I'm delighted to be here. I want to be thanking Dylan and Jill and Ramsey, who are the staff here tonight. And I want to see if I can get my slides up here. I would also be remiss, of course, if I didn't acknowledge my family. So my loving spouse and kind son, who are always supporters of my work and me of theirs. I'm always indebted to them for the ideas that they provide me, and of course I have colleagues across campus and around the country who've been kind enough to critique my work and to make it better for those criticisms. So let me start with a little joke, not apocryphal. Here, about 25 years ago, I'm a graduate student in Chicago, and I'm a vendor at the Maxwell Street Market. I'm talking with a hot dog vendor, and who comes up but a Buddhist monk? And what does the monk ask for? Indeed, thank you for playing. Make me one with everything, right? And so I'm just sitting there laughing, and the monk hands the vendor $20, has his hand out. And what's the vendor say? Anybody know? Change comes from within. Right? Yeah. Ooh. And so, the vendor's the monk is a little chagrined, right? He's a little upset about this, but being a monk, he regains his equanimity, right? And says so at that point, actually, as I recall, a young delivery boy comes running up and says, we're in the shadow of the loop. Maxwell Street Market's in the shadow of the loop. And the delivery boy says, ask for directions, and the monk winks at the vendor and looks at the boy and says, take the eightfold path. Right? That's Buddhist, I'm sorry. Okay. In these jokes is encapsulated the guts of my talk, right? Markets are everything, right? What they provide us comes from within us, right? And it's realized through interaction with others. And markets really are the crossroads of ideas. And I think that you'll come away with a sense of the history of those crossroads and a sense of the future that marketplaces have for us. So marketplaces have multiple functions, right? They serve economic functions, political functions, social functions historically, and more contemporary, we're asking them to serve the public health. So we're asking ourselves here, this lecture series is about critical things in society. So what is it about marketplaces that makes them critical, a critical function of society? Well, I could quote for you from a report in 1912, the City Council of Chicago, that's echoed in cities across the United States concerned with the flood of immigrants, unsocialized into society. What to do with unemployed? What about women and their prospects, the handicapped? And across city after city after city, I've documented how they turn to marketplaces to help socialize immigrants, to provide employment opportunities across for people recently unemployed, as well as a stepladder for those new to society, and to provide food access. That became a concern more than 100 years ago. William Head wrote the book, How Great Cities Are Fed, in 1927, and marketplaces occupy a prominent place in that story. So markets are actually critical. They're critical directly, they influence people's prospects, and they're critical indirectly because of this crossroads of ideas and behavior that I'm alluding to. So let's see here. Okay. Let me go back in history a few thousand years. We all recall our ancient Greek, right? Cosmopolitan, right? The universal polis, right? The universal people, right? Marketplaces, the agora in Greek society, the Trajan market in Rome, were central to bringing societies together, to creating societies. There were places where the ideas were debated. There were places where the politicians, gave rein to new ideas and new ways of organizing society. And of course, in marketplaces, people found what they things to purchase to distinguish themselves. There were sources of status. There were places where you could go and acquire goods or services that would distinguish you in society from other people around you. So marketplaces were central to forming societies. Now you step forward 1,000 years or so to Europe. Again, distinction and status were in high demand. But what was happening in Europe, right? There was war after war. There was societies were melting down and reconfiguring all the time. Princes and principalities were constantly in conflict with each other. And it was very hard for folks to get things that distinguished themselves, that distinguished them from other people in society. Those trading routes, there were brigands, there was all kinds of difficulties. And so what kings and princes and royalty decided was, in order to secure trade routes from one place to another, they would create laws and enforce those laws with their military forces in order to ensure trade could go back and forth. And in this season, as we're waiting for different things in our lives to come, and kids are waiting for gifts and whatnot, there were holiday fairs, right, that occurred frequently in society. This is the Lendent Fair near Paris in Saint Denis from the 12th century. Saint Denis being a relatively famous place, right, recently. So from the 12th century is this particular image. So the politicians, they needed ways to distinguish themselves. Society needed ways to provision themselves. Trade needed law. And indeed, the lex mercantile was formed from the basis of trade between societies. So markets inspired trade, infrastructure, and modern law. I could go into this in greater detail. I can give you things to read if you want to read them, but let's step forward to the last 100-odd years. The Progressive Era, right, 100 years or so ago, again took law and put it in the service of society. The regulatory state has its roots 100 years ago in the Progressive Era. Prior to the Progressive Era, exchange was kind of catch as can. You know, that bottle of patent medicine that you purchased from the vendor, who knows what was actually in it, right? I've got a funny story I could tell you about that, but I won't right now. Ask me later. So those regulatory structures became important and took place. They were responding to changes in society. Rapidly growing population because sanitation was coming online. The mortality rates were decreasing. Technology was becoming important, so transportation of food was easier. Some markets, you can see advertisements for indoor markets beckoning housewives to the cool, comfortable indoor air provided by by huge fans circulating air in marketplaces. So law and technology began to transform the retail landscape. On the one hand, we have marketplaces that became very legitimate. Cities said markets are very important places for social, political, economic activities, as I sort of alluded to right now. But also modern retail. First grocery stores were in the 1930s, the first modern grocery stores. Then, towards the middle of the century, we had some big changes. One of the really big changes was until 1940, street vendor was a census occupation category. What you care about, you measure, right? You count it. You find ways to figure it out. And when the census quit enumerating street vendors, we have very complicated and incredibly difficult way to get to large numbers of what's going on in marketplaces and in street vendors. So that was very important, changing occupation categories. Meanwhile, down on this track, we've got modern retail, the advent of modern retail. Malls started coming online. Secondary retail, which is what I mean by Ross, right? So in other words, merchandise was circulated from your Sears, wasn't sold in Sears, it found another home in your Ross, and then it found yet another home, right? Tertiary retail, last chance in McFrugal's. And what happened to it then? All the things that don't get sold there. They ended up going through things like railroad auctions and buyback programs to markets, to flea markets, farmers markets, swap meets, whatever they're called, wherever they are. After 1940, that legal change really delegitimized markets. That and the difficult reputation that many markets have. If I ask you all to raise your hands and tell me who all knows about Maxwell Street Market in Chicago, few people do. Maxwell Street, where you can go get brand new used hubcaps, right? Maxwell Street, where you can get all kinds of goods at discounted price. Why? Because it probably belonged to somebody else. That delegitimized markets for a long time. That delegitimization, markets suffered at the hands of that delegitimization for many, many years. And at the same time, modern retail, contemporary retail, malls, that enjoyed a big up. I mean, that's the modern thing to do, right? You know, so still though, markets went on. Markets went on. Why? Because society continued to enjoy influxes of immigrants. Why? Because poor and less well-off populations or other folks just simply wanted to recycle and reuse things, or they could purchase things at price points that were affordable to them. More recently, of course, those swap meets and flea markets and street markets were rejoined with farmers markets, right? 1968, the Berkeley Farmers Market. 1972, Dane County Farmers Market led a wave of markets. Again, sort of indicating how people who shop at markets are leading with, change comes from within, right? People are seeing their tastes, their preferences, their priorities. They're beginning to change, and they're taking advantage of forms that they may have remembered when they were children, but taking advantage of them in their adults. 1977, there's an article in Progressive Farmer magazine. Don't have a farmer's market? Want one? Start it yourself. Right? So now we've got 10,000 or so farmers markets in the country. Yet, again, in the last 20, 30 years, there have been reemerging concerns. The very same concerns that plagued society, American society, 120 years ago, reemergent. Health, access to food, employment problems, immigrants. What are we going to do with all these folks who aren't familiar with our society? And yet this economic form of the marketplace has been re-legitimized by people saying, I remember what healthy, fresh food tasted like. I remember what it was like whenever I could provision my family from vendors at Maxwell Street. I remember Carl Sandburg's poem, The Fish Crier. I remember Walter Willard Motley's novels about marketplaces. I remember that the blues came from, the northern blues came from Maxwell Street. You might go see a movie called Cheat You Fair, the story of the blues and the important role that Maxwell Street has in those blues. So all of these are crucial elements, crucial elements of human expression that are found in marketplaces. But I'm not a big expert. I don't have great knowledge of those things. What I do have some knowledge of, let me share a little bit more with you. So economic impact. Let's talk about economic impact. One of the things that we want to do with markets is we want to measure things. We can't measure things. It's hard to make claims about it. So when we talk about economic impact, we're asking questions about income and taxes and business formation. And what a number of studies, some of my work and work of others has shown that marketplaces invigorate underutilized locations. You got a place that's got proximate population, but it's a little underutilized, markets can help make that place better. Employment and human capital formation. A lot of times, adults vending in a market take their kids. The kids learn a lot about society and about business practices. in the market. Business incubation. Low-income families earn a second or even a third income from markets and vending. Of course, farmers markets in particular are huge promoters, leading indicators of sustainable agriculture and organic practices in farming, and etc. And of course, from the perspective of government, you create a destination. Markets are some place that people want to go. Just FYI, that's my pickup truck. In 1990, that's Steve Greenspan, an undergraduate at Northwestern. He is collecting data for me. Anyways, so we have a lot of work that estimates non-economic benefits of marketplaces. We know that senior citizen food access and food access for lower income folks is important. We know that green practices, in terms of signaling demand, the greens, I don't mean just green vegetables, right? But I mean organic and other sustainable practices in agriculture that support marketplace, that support society, that are fostered through participation in marketplaces. Now, of course, in business formation in particular, this slide right here, I did not mean to do that. This slide right here, this, folks, you'll see sandpaper, different kinds of sandpapers here in women's clothing right here. This is 5 families. It started off as one business selling sandpaper. The wives all said, we want a business too. If you want to sell sandpaper, we'll sell whatever. You bet we'll sell sandpaper, but we'll probably do better if we sell things that we want to sell. And so over 40 years, these businesses moved from Maxwell Street into the city of Chicago into storefront businesses. This is a Maxwell Street picture as well. I honestly don't know what happened with this young lady. I just think it's a cute picture. But what we can describe from research are the conditions by which women move into business, and how it is that those businesses, whether fostered by men or women, whether they're fostered by different ethnic groups, however they're created, how they move and grow from small businesses on the street to big businesses in the city, to businesses that motivate a lot of activity. So in effect, the spirit that people have of entrepreneurship, it only pans out if it's supplemented by supportive families and inspired by a vision for the future, for their children or for themselves. So we often think of the entrepreneur as pulling themselves up by the bootstrap. There is no such thing. Well, on these boots, there is a bootstrap. But there is no such thing, right? Nobody does anything without the support of other folks. Markets don't exist in the absence of law, right? In the absence of an order that people put together. Likewise, business doesn't happen without folks being supportive of those folks going into business. Marketplaces, another critical role is fostering social life. The social life that I speak of goes by many names. Some authors call them third places, right? Not work, not home, places of conviviality. The polite protests of the singing grannies. Who hasn't seen the singing grannies down at the Dane County Farmers Market? Information shared or at least offered, right, in marketplaces. Markets are human scale, right? They may feel big, but as you walk through them, you've got your head up, you're looking at things, you're observing what's going on around you, you see different folks interacting in different ways. Youth are very involved in marketplaces around the United States. So there's important social dimensions. Of course, a lot of work has gone into documenting the various ways that markets get formed by different municipalities or different organizations. And it's important to think of these political and regulatory activities, because markets in and of themselves don't exist in the absence of such regulatory opportunities, regulatory support. Research has shown how marketplaces can order themselves, how vendors can order themselves in the absence of the state, and how markets and vendors mitigate risks. They support public safety and public services. One of the things that that many of you may remember about this. In May 2010, street vendors in New York foiled the Times Square bombing. I don't know if you remember that, but, and of course there's even larger political scale activities. What I'm thinking of here is, does anybody know who Mohamed Bouazizi was? Yeah, so a few of you do. So 6 months after that Times Square, the foiling of that Times Square bombing, was the inception of the Arab Spring. What was one of the catalyzing moments of that? Mohamed Bouazizi, a Tunisian street vendor, burned himself to death because he was tired of harassment of government officials in Tunisia. And a lot of people point to that as one of the catalysts of the Tunisian revolution and the subsequent Arab Spring. So in these struggles, momentous as they can feel, started with such inauspicious beginnings as, well, inauspicious, no, that's not the appropriate usage, but from a beginning that might seem so pointless, right, can come incredible changes, can come, and put differently, it can prevent momentous catastrophes, as in the Times Square bombing. So what I'm suggesting is that we might find a virtuous crossroads, as it were, of ideas and behavior in marketplaces, with these intersecting paths that people are advancing legitimate concerns about what makes their communities feel vibrant and what makes their communities more healthy from their own perspectives. So in that regard, then, we've got to return to politics. And it's worth thinking about some futures of markets. I like to play with words. And so I'm not thinking of futures here in the sense of price clearing mechanisms for pork bellies, right, in the Chicago Board of Trade, although that's a market, right? I'm thinking about outdoors markets and futures for those markets. And one of the very important things that we need is research on political legitimation of markets. So I have a grant right now from the USDA that's called Indicators for Impact. And that the point of that is to empower market managers around the country, farmers market managers, to collect data in meaningful ways, and then to be able to interpret that data, analyze it, and report it out. This is a sample. Oh no, goodness gracious, I'm so sorry. That was my giveaway there. Okay. To report that data out to decision makers in their community. Report that data out to partners in their community. Report that data to the vendors themselves for reflection about decision making in the market, so that decision making in the market need not be ad hoc. It can have some basis. Not all decision making will always be rational per se, but it can be informed by data, and market managers have been very interested in this project. We're working with 9 markets. We're working with 17 markets in 11 states on this project, and I'll discuss it a little bit more. But the future, or a future for markets, is all about communication. Communication that fosters further interaction and produces influence that hopefully markets can use in their communities to advance what are, in effect, common goods, common interests, common purposes. So how can markets respond to those that criticize them as leftovers, as holdouts, as anachronistic in some way? This is how. Of course, there's ongoing research on economic functions of markets. So what we mean here, though, is, and what I really am trying to push towards, is different scales. So I am among a number of scholars who know about particular markets in great detail. But what happens when there's a market association, right? What happens when the New York City green markets come and ask questions about how they can foster their prospects of their vendors, how they can incorporate across their supply chains more efficiently, from producer through to waste disposal. So, and how is it that when we get those sorts of questions, responding to those questions is not is not easy unless we have research to get towards that. And so I've been working with the City of Chicago's Farmers Markets Group, 27 markets, and I've got a book chapter with one of my graduate students on that coalition and outcomes associated with that coalition. Recently, the Twin Cities was on a call with folks in the Twin Cities. There's 24 farmers markets in the Twin Cities that they're talking about establishing partnerships in a fashion that advance their mutual interests. If you've never been to Barcelona, Spain, people ask me, what's your favorite city in the world? Well, I haven't been to 99.9% of them, but Barcelona is beautiful. I love Barcelona. Not just for the markets, the Miró Museum and stuff like that, but the markets, the system of markets and the interconnectedness of the markets to food production and food distribution in that city is truly incredible, truly incredible. Here in this state, yes sir, just let me squeeze out this one other thing. Here in this state, the Main Street Initiative we're working with the Main Street Initiative in 5 of the 27 markets in this state that are associated with that initiative in order to begin to scale up our understanding of what's going on with markets and produce the sort of data that might be more amenable to larger scale analysis. Yes, sir? Competitors. So I'm sorry, I'm probably taking this question out of turn. So let me repeat the question so everybody can hear, right?
Okay, so of these
Yeah.
research you're doing for Chicago,
Right. Do the markets see do markets in a multi-market context see themselves as competitors?
That's one question.
That's one question.
The second question was, what would be the value, or what are you trying to accomplish with the research and their interdependence or working together in partnership to accomplish more attendance, more purchases?
Right. So the second part of the question is then, what does one do with that data once you have it? What do you accomplish with that data? First to the question of competition. Competition is rife, right? But it turns out that farmers usually have many modalities of moving their product. They vend at many markets. Markets are not their only way of selling product, so that's often the case. So competition, it's like competition in everything else. There's some, but it's not necessarily the only deciding factor for a farmer. And then in terms of for a coalition of markets. And then in terms of the second question with respect to what do you do with this data? Well, I like to say that I'm a scientist. And scientists, what we do first is describe the world. We try and get a good, clear description of the world. Now, those are always perspectival, granted, but embracing multiple perspectives is never super difficult. You just have to be open to what other folks have to say about the world. All right? So the first step in these activities is description. Once we get good, clear data, then it can help make the market managers, it can help make decision making easier for market managers. It can help them communicate to the cities that they're part of. So many cities still rail against markets. There's so much resistance still in many parts of the country to having a farmers market or open air markets. And part of it is for the good reasons that were given in the Progressive Era and the Food and Drug Act. However, those were made at a time for a reason. Do they need to be here at this time for the same reason? So there's many, many questions to go through on that. So, pardon me. So clearly, from my perspective, we can do research on every one of probably 20,000 swap meets, farmers markets, flea markets, street markets, or we can try and work at scale with larger groups, like the Direct Sale Association of the United States, which covers their standard industrial code. The way that we collect data on them is through an economic method that says that lumps street markets and other sorts of street retail with all this other kind of retail activity? Those questions are difficult and ahead. More research needs to be done on those questions. So of course, also though, I want to return for a little bit to more humanistic concerns. How is it that people use markets? We know if you look at cultural artifacts like novels, crafts, poetry, there's a lot of work, a lot of human creative effort has used markets as a way to express parts of our lives. But I'm interested in trying to document more completely what are those influences? How have they come up? How have they ramified through networks and influenced other people and other people's imaginations and the way people structure their lives? These are humanistic concerns that are a little bit outside maybe the economic concerns that initially motivated my interest, but they're very important nonetheless. Markets enliven places. These electric blues guys, I mean, they were robbing power at Maxwell Street. I could show you some pictures of folks dancing out there dressed to the T's, right? In our contemporary scene, we get a lot of different activities. Jugglers. I've tried to get my son to go out and do his Rubik's Cube out there. There's all kinds of different things that all sorts of purposes people have for markets besides economic. So of course, there's also health concerns, and by health here, I mean health in a very broad sense. I mean, once you access food, how do you cook it? So many folks nowadays don't know how to cook food, and again, this is a question more concerning farmers markets. We have an excellent system here in town and where cooking demonstrations are frequently seen. But then what happens across the rest of that supply chain? What happens to the waste products or the food at the end of the day? And of course, there in Dane County, in the city of Madison, there's progressive activity about what happens with food. You might look at the work of Chris Brockle in this regard, but not only him. I'm just thinking of him because I heard from him recently about some of his activities. What happens to increase the health of healthy food? Healthy soils. What happens to increase the overall public health outcome? Trying to find ways to do greening the transportation, greening the supply chain. How is it that restaurants and grocery stores can take advantage of that to the economic benefit, as well as the health benefits of the larger society? There's a lot of questions here that, fortunately, I have a class that I teach on this subject that students are interested in investigating. Health, more particularly, though, is addressed through social connections, right? It's a lot of fun. We have fun with each other. Food access, SNAP benefits, right? Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits. Increased physical activity. I like to ride to markets. I live in Hill Farms. I've got markets close by. I ride my bike or walk to the market. Health education, not just cooking, but health education programs. And of course, just general connections, giving folks a sense of the rural to urban gradient, right? How it is that their place is manifested differently because of a market in that particular built environment. So I hope that I've given you some sense of the activities associated with marketplaces. I hope you have some sense of how I think of as being critical to our future activities, our future social life. I've worked real hard at developing applied research techniques that capacitate folks in achieving their goals and helping them understand what's going on with them and helping them determine and advance the goals that they have. And I'm looking forward myself to continuing this work for at least another 10 years. I look forward to retiring as well, though, one of these days. And I look forward to seeing you all at markets to enjoy this rich life that we have that's been thousands of years in the making. I appreciate your attention tonight. Here's a last laugh for your mental health. There I am. Graduate student, 1990 at Chicago's Maxwell Street Market, driving that little white pickup truck around. Thank you again for your attention. Do y'all have any other questions? Oh, well.
So I have a favor first. Will you go back to the slide of the North Carolina farmers market?
Oh, you bet. I'll send it. This is
Perfect.
Oh,
No, I
okay.
want you in there too.
Oh, jeez.
The farm market manager is Margaret Krome-Lukens.
Oh,
She's my niece.
son of a gun. I had no idea.
So I
Stephen
should.
Truff, folks, professor of soils and all-around cool guy. Margaret Krome, his loving spouse, who's really, you wonder. Anyways, I won't make the joke.
So I'll also add a question. Food production, processing, distribution, and disposal by various accounts account for 1/4 to 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions. In light of discussions underway right now, and in light of your notion of markets as places for ideas and activities, can markets have any impact in that whole process?
That's a great question. So there is the first article that was written about this is just a report that compares the greenhouse gas emissions from a grocery store in Toronto to a marketplace about close by that grocery store. And the findings were pretty simple, that for across the market basket that you could buy, the greenhouse gas emissions were less at the market than at the grocery store. Now, even so, even given the fact that we know that contemporary retail uses huge shipping modality, tanker, rail, over-the-road container ships that really reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Even so, now the question is what if you integrate the practices across the supply chain, which is what Steve's alluding to, right? What if you look at the way that the food is produced, then the way it's transported, and et cetera, right? What if you look at the quality of the soils that are done and how they're managed to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and go forward from there? What if you look at the waste products or the multifunctionality of the agriculture that's producing that food and try and project from there? I don't know of any work on that. Now, I think that that's an eminently important thing to study. Other questions? Laura's got a question.
Along those same lines, do you have any sense of the capacity of markets to meet the need compared to grocery stores? I mean, markets are generally open a few hours, a day or a week. Is it really feasible to think about meeting most needs through markets?
Yeah, I kind of doubt it. It's a great question. We often think about related questions for food production. Is it possible to do X with Y, right, with whatever production practices? I'm kind of a skeptic on a lot of these things. A few years ago, I was on NBC News with Brian Williams, and the question came to me, will aquaponics be viable as a business thing? And I said, no, not for 20 years. The business models just don't exist. Now, am I wrong yet? I don't know. I mean, that was 5 or 6 years ago. It's hard to tell. Aquaponics operations that I thought were set in stone and terrific have gone out of business. Others are coming online and at larger scales. It's hard to say. And now for markets, I don't know. Part of this is a matter, I think, of social organization. Not so much will markets be organized in a fashion to accommodate the shopping needs of folks over day and night, and what kind of business model, what kind of relationships would the vendors have to enjoy with each other in order to facilitate that? It's hard to say. Even as we speak right now, the big season for the farmers markets is just starting in New Orleans in the South, So in the summer, markets there don't do real well because a lot of the product is, it goes bad so quickly you can't hardly get it from farm to market, and so or other seasonal changes in what's produced there. So part of it is not just whether or not the markets can fulfill the demand, it's whether the products will be there to help fulfill the demand. That's a complicated question. A lot of markets are dedicated, like Dane County, for instance, right? Solely dedicated to state of Wisconsin produce. One of the exercise questions I ask in class, let's see I'm going to ask you a question. Why is it, what do you notice when you're walking up State Street to the market, right? What do you notice about the difference from when you cross onto the square? Why is there that big difference between the businesses you find on the square and the businesses you find across the square? I know some of you know the answer, so shout it out. People, no, that's... So what distinguishes what's sold inside the square from outside the square? Part of the answer is it's the producer has to make it. But there's another step to that answer, and that's that, in short, state law. State law obtains within the square. Across the street, city law obtains. It's a jurisdictional question. That's why at the Hill Farms State Office Building, same law obtains. Go to the Hilldale Mall, city law obtains. And actually there, of course, it's a private market. They have their own things going on. In back, yes ma'am, and then you, yes?
Oh. Are you willing to share anything about the proposed Madison public market in terms of the needs that it will address in our community or the benefits? I know I'm noticing your reaction that maybe my opening was, are you willing to share? So anything about the needs it will address or the benefits and how it compares to some of the other public markets about which it might be modeled?
I wonder what it would have been like had the market here in town, the public market here in town, not closed in 1924. I wonder, right? So Mayor Dave asked me about, say, 8 years ago to do some work whenever they were doing market planning. So got a group of students, we did some economic analysis and said, you know what, this is pretty skinny. If all you want is a food thing for a big public market, if you don't think about processing, the margins here are going to be awful thin. It's going to be very difficult for folks to make any money unless you're really thinking across the supply chain. And then about 5 years ago or something like that, Vanderwall, I think, Dan Kennelly, who works for the city, was working for Vanderwall at the time, and Vanderwall was doing some work with the city about trying to determine market, and we just sat down, and for the last 5 years I've been sitting with Dan regularly. Now he works for the city and consulting on this new public market. And I have urged this multifunctionality that I've spoken to today. So do I think that under the current situation that multifunctionality will be realized? It's not from what I've read in the reports. It could be. I think that there's a real opportunity, that a public market presents a real opportunity. But again, I'm a little concerned about the scale, given the proximity of the North Side Feed Kitchen, which itself is, not operating at capacity, but could easily be. I guess I worry about these things, because when folks give me money to do something, I try and be a real good steward of that money. And if we're going to give a lot of money to subsidize a market, we need to be good stewards, as good as we possibly can with that money. Because it's likely that we're going to subsidize it for a while. It's likely. So, do I think it can realize these functions? Yes. Do I think the promise is there? I think it is, but constituting these things, everything is in the constitution of these things. How it is that people decide to get together and organize the particulars of the activities, and how that those get integrated sufficiently well that that benefits are realized. I'm sorry, I'm not sure that I've answered your question directly, because it's a hard question. I mean, the city gave a whole lot of money to Project for Public Spaces for something that we could have said in about 6 paragraphs. You know, I mean, that my students did in effect 8 years ago. It's, please ask another version of the question. I will try again, or tag on, or we will go to this woman right here. I'm happy to try and engage this. I mean, I've talked to alder people about this. I've talked to, I mean, in the abstract, everything is possible, right? Yes, ma'am.
So I'm wondering if you have any comments about the future of markets in tandem with the rise of urban farming.
Oh, sure. Well, there we go. There's that integrative opportunity, right? There's that integrative opportunity. So the more urban farming that happens across the variety of modalities that it might happen, aquaponics, rooftop gardening, hoop houses in the ground, so I'm a big fan of dirt because my family was a farm family, but I've come to see that there are a variety of ways, and really, again, I want to emphasize this, a variety of business models. There are a lot of folks who are in farming and marketing, not because they want to get wealthy, but because they think of themselves as stewards of whatever it is that they're up to, stewards of the community, stewards of the land, stewards of good food. So they're driven by deeply held values. And when they are able to integrate across the supply chain with other folks who hold those values, then it's possible, I think, to realize multiplicative benefits, not just additive, you might say. Yes.
I've got 2 questions. Are you familiar with the market in Portland, Maine that failed?
Probably. No.
And I was curious why it failed.
So let me try and remember which. So in Portland, my favorite story about Portland is the street vendors, who a lot of them sourced from that market, but there was. I better hold off.
The market was basically a gift.
Yeah,
it was an individual who basically had it built and donated it to the city.
Yeah.
I was curious why it didn't make it.
Yeah.
The other question is, how's the public market in Milwaukee doing?
Well, boy, now there you go. That's another one. So I often take students to look at that market and compare it to other markets. I don't know how many folks are familiar with that market. Okay. So in my view, and I would hope that the mic can get around quick for anybody who wants to express a contrary view or echo or say something else. In my view, that market is not masked well on its site. So it's not designed well. It's not friendly design for access. It's not, doesn't have a nice, it's not inviting, in terms of its architectural layout. It's a pretty expensive market. It's a pretty, it's not cheap to get food there. So, and it's not easy to access. Public transportation to that site is not good. The population density around the market is not very high, although fairly well-heeled folks live around there, but enough to support a market when they're working necessarily, and the market, the hours don't, there's a mismatch of hours. So I have yet, it persists. I'm trying to remember. Do you know how much, does anybody know how much, I can't pull out of my brain right now, how much the city subsidizes that market? Do It's a, okay. Does anybody, I mean, I would be happy to hear other views of this or things that I haven't said with respect to the Milwaukee market. The Portland market, doggone it, why can't I remember that? I'm sorry. Can't remember.
So, taking a positive view, tell us about the Twin Cities. You said that they had 24
markets.
24 markets?
Yeah, we had an interesting call with them the other day.
What is it that what political, social, economic, cultural factors have made that successful?
Well, okay, that's a good question. So it's nascent. The markets are successful, but the scale, the economies of scale they'd like to realize is what they're aiming for. And what they want to do is measure. So they want to try and make decisions based on firm measurement, which is where my current USDA sponsored work, the indicators for impact, because that provides metrics that helps the market managers do this measurement across ecological things, economic things, social things, health things. And so as a group, they can choose a set of metrics that they think that once they collect that data, then they can make decisions based on that data going forward about the future of whether or not to form a coalition and how it then to modify activities in the coalition about about how much to bring and who to bring it, or I don't know what all decisions they might want to have together, but they want to make those decisions on the basis of data instead of what feels good at a particular moment. So we're waiting. That Indicators for Impact grant is 1.5 years in, and we just finished our first year of pilot data collection with 37 metrics that we refined from the literature over the last 20 years. And the 17 markets that we're working with, of those 17, the 5 that are the Wisconsin Main Street program markets all have the very same metrics in order for the state to be able to try and get a sense of how the Main Street program articulates with the activities of those markets by comparison to the activities of the other markets that are not collecting data. So in year 3 of the grant, year 2 of the data collection, we're going to spread that out a little bit more, and hopefully at the end of the grant, we'll hand over to anybody who wants it well-tested data collection techniques, metrics, etc. Is that live? One more question. Yes, sir.
Today I went by the closed Walgreens off of Verona Road here in Madison, and I was thinking about the food desert. And I'm curious the connection of what you've been sharing and that issue.
That's a tough one. 4 or 5 years ago now, I worked with an engineering 160 class to build a couple of food carts in anticipation of that, because at the time the Cub Food had just closed, and there was a big problem, and Walgreens hadn't introduced any produce into that store yet. And the whole idea is what modalities are appropriate, for whoever's resident, whoever's there, in order to access food, so mobile markets and whatnot. And so right now, as you know, a cooperative, the city has made a small grant to establish a cooperative in that neighborhood. Whether or not that, I hope that it'll get formed, but we don't know whether or not it actually will or not. Will that store is demolished now, isn't it? I think isn't that store demolished now? Yeah, the Walgreens, or is it still standing? I'm trying to remember. Is it still there? Okay. So given that it's still there, and given that what it was designed to do, it could conceivably house retail food establishment. It's not equipped as a commercial kitchen. It doesn't have water. So, I mean, that whole set of activities would be out of the question in the absence of a significant remodel, right? But the refrigeration exists. There's refrigeration there. So could it serve? I mean, if you're asking is, could that serve to house a cooperative, for instance, or another form of retail food activity, or could that serve as, well, I don't see why not. The question might be, how much might we have to subsidize it, and for how long? You know, how willing would, because it always takes time for folks to get used to the presence of a new retail opportunity. We are, in a word or three, creatures of habit, right? And ourselves, just in the same way that I'm talking about markets integrating many things, we ourselves, our lives are made up of multiply integrated activities. And it's hard, as soon as you pull out one thread, the other threads have to adjust, or everybody gets upset. Likewise for markets. It's conceivable to make such a thing work. But what all has to be done in order to make it work, I'm not entirely, I have thought about that a little bit. One more or no? Right, indeed. So the comment was, so the comment was, Nakoma Plaza, just down the road, has some 5,000 square footprint buildings that have served as grocery stores, restaurants, and whatnot for many years. We've lived here 11 years, and I remember they've been there for that long at least. And so, and that does present the problem. If you've got a 15,000, 20,000 square footprint, you're heating, cooling a lot more cubic, right? 40,000 square foot grocery store that's used to a typical stock of items, right? 20,000 items in a typical grocery store. That's a different ball of wax. I think the principal takeaway I'd like you to have from this little dialogue is, food access is one thing that markets do. Can such a space incorporate multiple activities, serve a variety of purposes, foster a more broadly speaking, the public good in that place? Thank you all for your attention.